The twin sons of Thria bled their light through the translucent towers of the imperial citadel, turning the air itself into gold. The palace floated above the surface on columns of anti-gravity stone, shimmering like a mirage over the glass plains. It was said that within those walls, perfection was not only expected, it was engineered. Every heir of the royal line was sculpted in gene vats before birth, designed to embody the empire's ideals of symmetry and beauty. Yet, one creation had defied their calculations. She had been born alive when the others thought she would not be. Her skin shimmered in a strange spectrum, opal and violet in the light, a deep bronze shadow when she turned away. Her eyes glowed faintly, the color of melted suns. The physicians said her genome had fused with unknown cosmic radiation from the birthing chamber's field. The courtiers whispered other things, a curse, an error, a punishment for the emperor's pride. From her earliest memories, she lived in silence. Her name was rarely spoken aloud, replaced by titles that hid disdain behind formality, the spare, the anomaly, the emperor's quiet one. She was given tutors who did not look her in the eye and servants who moved like ghosts through her quarters. When she passed through the halls, other daughters of the royal blood would avert their gaze, pretending to study their reflections in the obsidian walls. Only the mirrors never lied. She had learned to hate their truth, the uneven lines of her face, the strange iridescent shimmer that marked her as not quite right. Yet in the solitude of her chambers, she would place her hand upon the glass and watch the faint luminescence of her skin pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. It was as though something beneath her surface, something ancient, was trying to speak. The emperor visited her once each year, and always on the same day, the anniversary of her birth. He would arrive surrounded by attendants and holographic banners, his voice distant, wrapped in ceremony. His words were measured, his gaze carefully directed past her shoulder. "You will continue your studies," he said once, when she was 12. "But your presence at the public courts is no longer required. There are matters of lineage and presentation that you cannot yet comprehend." She understood enough. The empire had no place for flaws that glowed. In the vast archives of the palace, she found solace. There were things older than her father's rule, scrolls from the colonies before the genetic renaissance, stories written by humans before they had learned to splice their own blood. She read about imperfection as something that could be beautiful, about people who carved meaning from their weakness. She read about stars dying so new ones could be born. And slowly, within her, something began to resist the quiet suffocation of shame. But the moment of rebellion did not come from her, it came from the emperor's council. On the eve of her 16th solar cycle, as the palace prepared for the royal procession, the counselors gathered beneath the crystal domes to discuss her future. The empire was negotiating with the Keth Dominion, a race that revered purity and physical harmony. They demanded the emperor's daughters appear in the alliance ceremony. One of them, slender, cold, his voice like static, said what others would not. "Your Majesty, the presence of your unfortunate offspring would weaken the sanctity of the covenant. There are colonies suitable for her relocation." Relocation. A word painted in silk to hide its cruelty. By the next dawn, an imperial decree was sealed. She was to be transferred under diplomatic discretion to the outer colonies of Varn, where she would serve as a cultural observer. The phrase meant exile. She was told this by her attendant, an old automaton whose mechanical eyes flickered as it tried to mimic empathy. "Your transport leaves within the second rotation, my lady," it said softly. "You are advised to travel light." She did not weep. There was no one to weep for her. She packed a single box, a faded paper book from the archives, a carved piece of wood she had once shaped herself, and a fragment of mirror she had broken the day she stopped looking into it. As she left her chambers, the doors sealed behind her with a sigh of hydraulics, erasing her from the registry of royal quarters. The shuttle bay was nearly empty. The craft prepared for her departure was a small courier vessel, old and unadorned, its hull scored by time. 2 guards waited at the ramp, their faces hidden behind silver helmets. When she approached, one of them averted his gaze. The other, braver or perhaps more curious, looked at her directly, and froze. For a heartbeat, he seemed caught by the glow in her eyes. Then he bowed, not out of respect, but pity. As the engines ignited, she felt the vibration hum through her bones. The stars above the citadel blurred into streaks of light as the vessel rose through the atmosphere. She watched her home shrink into a golden speck below. The palace, the towers, the endless perfection, all dissolving into the black of space. For the first time in her life, she was beyond the reach of its gravity. The pilot, a quiet drone without a name, maintained the course toward the outer colonies. Through the viewport, nebulas unfurled in soft waves of color, radiant and infinite. She pressed her hand against the glass and wondered if this was what freedom felt like, loneliness wrapped in endless beauty. Hours turned to cycles. The hum of the engines was steady, hypnotic. She began to dream with her eyes open, dreams of planets where no one cared for symmetry, where life grew wild and chaotic. But fate, as it often does, had its own designs. A sudden jolt tore her from thought. The alarms blared, a streak of debris, invisible in the dark, struck the vessel's port side. The ship spun violently, systems flickering. The autopilot spoke in a calm, indifferent tone, critical failure in navigation matrix. Attempting emergency descent. She was thrown from her seat as the stars became a blur of silver and flame. Below, a dusty moon swelled into view, its surface scarred with metallic ruins. The pod detached before impact, cutting through the thin atmosphere like a burning seed. Inside, she clutched the carved wood in her hand. For a fleeting instant, she felt something stir in her chest, a strange pulse of warmth, not fear but recognition, as though the universe had been waiting for her fall. Then the world went white, and the last thing she heard before the crash was the whisper of the engines dying, like a sigh at the end of a long exile. The wind on Varn was a voice older than any empire. It swept across the iron dunes and hollowed plains, carrying dust fine as glass, whispering through the skeletons of forgotten machines. The sky was the color of faded copper, streaked by the remnants of orbiting wreckage that fell in slow, burning arcs every few days. It was here, on this barren moon at the edge of charted space, that the Carpenter lived. Arden woke before dawn, as always, when the horizon was still black and the wind had not yet begun its long howl. His dwelling was a shelter of welded plates and scavenged circuits, half buried against the slope of a ridge. Inside, tools hung like sacred symbols, chisels, sonic cutters, fragments of alien alloys. He had once been a builder of ships, but the war had ended that. Now he built what the survivors needed to keep breathing: homes, water collectors, prosthetic limbs, coffins when the radiation storms came too soon. That morning, he heard it, the low thunder of something tearing through the atmosphere. It wasn't the rhythmic crash of a meteor shower. This sound had direction, intent, a metallic scream that shook the sky. He stepped out into the cold and saw a streak of fire cutting across the horizon, trailing fragments of burning hull. It vanished behind the dunes, and moments later, the shockwave reached him, dull, distant, but unmistakable. By the time he reached the crash site, the dust had not yet settled. His breath rasped through the filter of his rebreather mask as he climbed the ridge and looked down upon the wreck. The ship, no, an escape pod, was half buried in the sand, its plating cracked and glowing faintly from the heat of re-entry. Blue steam hissed from ruptured vents, painting the air with the smell of ozone and scorched carbon. Arden scanned the wreckage. No insignia, no transponder, Imperial tech, though. The kind of craft that never fell here unless something had gone very wrong. He approached cautiously, his boots sinking into the shifting sand. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Inside the cracked viewport, something stirred. He forced the hatch open with the edge of his plasma cutter, the door giving way with a cry of warped metal. Inside, a figure lay half buried under tangled restraints, her body faintly luminous in the dim light. For a moment, he thought she was one of the engineered pilgrims who sometimes came to die in the wastelands, creatures made of art and science, not meant for survival. But then she breathed, and the light beneath her skin pulsed gently, like a heartbeat turned visible. Her eyes opened, brilliant, molten gold against the shadow. She looked at him as though she were staring through him, not at him, her pupils contracting in strange geometric patterns. For an instant, Arden felt his mind blur, like the space around her distorted reality itself. Then she blinked, and the moment passed. He reached out a gloved hand. "You're hurt," he said through the filter, his voice rough from years of breathing dust. She did not answer. Her gaze wandered to the broken hatch, the alien sky beyond. "This isn't Freya," she murmured, her voice faint but clear, resonant in a way that made the air seem alive. "No," he said. "It's worse." When he lifted her from the wreckage, her skin was warm, too warm, like holding a piece of living metal. The faint radiance of her body illuminated the path back through the dunes. The sand seemed to respond to her presence, rippling faintly in trails behind their steps. At his shelter, he placed her on the workbench he used for repairing machines. She lay still, eyes closed, breathing shallow. He removed her flight suit's shattered harness and found patterns etched along her arms, organic circuitry, veins of bioluminescence that shimmered when his tools passed too close. Her body was a fusion of biology and technology beyond anything he had seen, even during the war. When she finally stirred, he was sitting nearby, adjusting a cracked piece of armor. She turned her head toward him, wincing as she moved. "Why did you help me?" He didn't look up. "Because you were dying." "That's not an answer," she said softly. Arden set the tool down and met her gaze. "Out here, nobody asks who you are before they save you. They just decide whether you're worth the trouble." "You looked worth it." Her expression flickered, something like disbelief passing across her face. "You don't even know what I am." "Something the Empire lost," he said. "That's enough." She looked away then, to the faint glow of the atmosphere filtering through the cracks of his shelter. "The Empire didn't lose me," she whispered. "They sent me away." He said nothing, but the way her voice cracked told him more than words could. He recognized the sound of exile. He had carried it himself once, when he was cast out of the orbital foundries for refusing to build weapons that could erase cities. Days passed. She healed slowly, her strength returning, though the air of Varn made her lungs ache. She told him her name once, but it was a string of sounds no human tongue could shape properly, so he called her Lyra instead, after the constellation he could never see from this moon. She didn't correct him. Together they began repairing the pod, though Arden knew it was futile. The core was shattered beyond recognition. But he let her try. She handled tools with a precision he'd never seen, every motion deliberate, as though her mind moved a fraction of a second ahead of time itself. Sometimes, when the sun set, she would sit outside the shelter and press her palms against the sand, listening. The dunes would hum faintly, responding to her touch. One evening, as the horizon burned red, she turned to him and asked, "Do humans ever stop missing where they came from?" Arden thought of the world he'd left behind, the green oceans, the towers of glass, the endless noise. "You don't stop missing it," he said. "You just start building something else." Lyra nodded, though her eyes were far away. "Then maybe I can build something too." In the silence that followed, the stars began to appear, cold and sharp against the void. She looked at them with a kind of reverence, as if she were searching for one that might still remember her name. And somewhere deep in the darkness above, a signal pulsed faintly, echoing through the void, a coded whisper of imperial frequency, moving slowly toward the moon that was never meant to be found. The months passed like drifting sand, and Varn changed with them. The storms grew gentler that season, as though the moon itself had decided to grant its visitors a brief mercy. Arden had begun to lose track of the days. The rhythm of his life, once measured by repairs and scarcity, had found something new to orbit around, the strange, luminous woman who shared his exile. Lyra moved differently now. Her steps had learned the gravity of the moon, her voice had softened, its alien cadence warming into something almost human. She had traded her broken flight suit for loose garments Arden stitched from scavenged fabric, but no cloth could hide what she was. When she worked beside him in the workshop, the faint radiance beneath her skin glowed through the seams, like light caught under water. Arden rebuilt the ruined pod not because he thought it would fly again, but because she needed the illusion that it might. Each night she studied its components by lamplight, rearranging circuits, sketching patterns into the dust, whispering formulas that didn't sound like any language he knew. He would watch her and feel something stirring, an uninvited awe. He had seen reactors pulse, plasma storms devour fleets, cities collapse under their own brilliance. Yet nothing in his long, hard life compared to the sight of her tracing light from her fingertips, repairing dead metal with living resonance. One evening she caught him staring. "You think I don't notice," she said, not unkindly. "You study me as though I were a problem to solve." He smirked, tightening a bolt. "Maybe I am. You glow in your sleep. I'm just trying to figure out what kind of creature dreams in light." "I don't dream," she murmured. "Not the way you do." She paused, her golden eyes reflecting the workshop's flickering lamp. "When I close my eyes, I see the resonance of the universe, the way particles speak to each other. Every atom hums with purpose. It's overwhelming sometimes." Arden wiped sweat from his forehead. "Sounds lonely." "It is," she said. Then, almost whispering, "But not anymore." After that, the silences between them became something more than quiet. They worked together like two harmonies learning the same song, his hands shaping wood and metal, hers shaping energy and sound. The walls of the shelter slowly transformed. What had once been a cold bunker became a place of intricate design. She taught him how to weave light through glass fibers so the lamps responded to movement. He showed her how to measure weight and balance through touch alone, how wood could breathe if shaped with patience. Soon they began to build things for the settlement beyond the ridge. Varn's colonists were a small, fractured community, miners, scavengers, wanderers. They feared the Empire but feared starvation more. When they saw the Carpenter return with a tall stranger whose presence seemed to bend the air around her, whispers spread fast. The villagers called her the lighted one behind her back. Children would follow her from a distance at dusk, watching her touch broken machines that began to hum again, metal flowers that bloomed at her fingertips. Arden warned her to be careful. "They don't understand what you are," he said one night as they shared a rare meal of protein roots and thermal water. "Out here, anything they don't understand becomes either holy or dangerous." She looked at him, her gaze unreadable. "Which am I to you?" He hesitated. The firelight caught her skin, scattering reflections on the metal walls. "Both," he said finally. Something passed between them then, wordless but immense. She reached out, tracing a faint line along his calloused wrist. His heart gave a startled answer. The contact was brief, but enough to make the room seem suddenly smaller, the air heavier with meaning neither of them dared name. Later, when the world outside had gone to sleep, she began to speak of her past in fragments. The Empire's breeding halls, where light and DNA were spliced like art, the way her father's voice had never once said her name. The endless mirrors that told her what she was not. Arden listened in silence, his rough hands still. He had long thought of the Empire as an abstraction, a cold machine that ruled through technology and myth. But in her words, he heard something heartbreakingly familiar, a loneliness shaped by perfection. Sometimes, when she spoke, her voice would carry a frequency that made the tools on the walls hum softly, as if even the machines leaned in to listen. He never told her that. He didn't need to. As the moons aligned that season, Varn's magnetic field began to shift. Strange lights appeared across the horizon, auroras that shouldn't exist, patterns that spiraled in deliberate geometry. The colonists said it was a sign of blessing. Arden had a different suspicion. He'd once worked on Imperial probes that used similar spectral signatures to scan for lost property. One night, long after Lyra had fallen asleep, he climbed the ridge with his old optical lens and looked toward the sky. Through the swirling auroras, he saw them, tiny glints of movement, too steady to be natural. Drones, in imperial formation, sweeping the moon in silent arcs. The signal he'd intercepted weeks ago on his receiver was no longer faint. It pulsed strong now, rhythmic, deliberate. He returned to the shelter before dawn. Lyra was awake, sitting outside, eyes fixed on the horizon where the auroras glowed. "They found me," she said quietly. He didn't ask how she knew. "What will they do if they find you?" he asked. Her answer came without hesitation. "Erase me. Not out of cruelty, but efficiency. The Empire cannot allow imperfection to exist with a voice." Arden felt the cold settle in his chest. "Then we'll hide you." She turned to him, her expression unreadable, almost sorrowful. "You don't understand. They'll search this world until they find me. Or destroy it trying." He looked at her glowing hands, the faint tremor in her voice. "Then maybe it's time we give them something else to see." Her golden eyes narrowed slightly. "You mean a distraction?" "No," he said. "A miracle." She studied him, the faintest curve of a smile breaking her stillness. "A miracle," she repeated softly, as if testing the weight of the word. That night they began to plan, surrounded by blueprints of metal and light. The storm outside grew in strength, the auroras twisting into spirals that reached toward the stars. Somewhere high above, Imperial scanners swept the surface, searching for the lost daughter of the throne. And deep beneath that sky, a human and an exile worked side by side, building something neither Empire nor time itself had imagined. The horizon burned with faint orange streaks, the auroras of Varn twisting like liquid fire in the thin atmosphere. Lyra stood at the edge of the ridge, her golden eyes reflecting the spectral display, every pulse of light seeming to resonate with the hum beneath her skin. Arden approached silently, carrying 2 containers of thermal water, but even that simple act seemed insignificant against the immensity of what was coming. They had both felt it for days, the distant vibration of engines slicing through the void, subtle and relentless. The Imperial fleet was on its way. Arden had seen the star charts shift, noted the small distortions in the magnetic field, and calculated the probable entry vector. Yet nothing in his experience could prepare him for the sight of ships appearing at the edge of the sky, shimmering like silver phantoms, their energy shields casting prismatic halos over the dunes. "They're close," he murmured, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. Lyra's gaze did not leave the horizon. "They are afraid," she said. "Afraid of what I have become." "They don't know you," he said. "And they never will, if we can stop them." Inside the shelter, they worked in silence. Arden retrieved the blueprints they had been sketching for weeks, towers of light and crystal, conduits of plasma and sound. Lyra traced her fingers along the diagrams, adjusting curves and angles with a precision that made the diagrams almost pulse with energy. The structures were not merely instruments, they were statements, a proof that life unbound by the Empire's rules could be both beautiful and dangerous. When the first probes touched down on the sands, they barely skimmed the surface, scanning with beams that twisted the very molecules of the air. Arden watched the instruments flicker, the energy reading spike. Lyra raised her hand, and the sensors reacted, not mechanically, but emotionally, as if her presence alone distorted the readings. The probes faltered, their programming conflicted by a force they could not classify. "They will send soldiers next," Arden said. "They always escalate." She turned toward him, the faint luminescence of her skin reflecting the sharp edges of the metal walls. "Then we do not hide. We make them see us." He frowned. "See? They will destroy what they don't understand." "They will see anyway," she said. "And when they see, they will understand something they cannot unsee." By midday, the fleet's shadow stretched across the horizon. The soldiers arrived in armored dropships, their boots kicking up clouds of red dust, scanning and probing. The villagers had fled, leaving the settlement empty, the structures still humming faintly from Arden's earlier repairs. The air thrummed with anticipation. Arden and Lyra assembled the tower outside, its skeletal framework catching the sunlight and refracting it into intricate patterns. The energy conduits thrummed as she activated the core. At first, the light was subtle, a glimmer that danced across the metal surfaces of the approaching dropships. Then it pulsed in rhythm, waves of iridescence spreading across the dunes, bending the very perception of reality. The soldiers froze. Their sensors registered anomalies, distortions in gravity, light, and sound, impossible to classify. Lyra's hands moved over the conduits like a conductor over an orchestra, and the tower responded, sending arcs of plasma along crystalline channels, weaving a resonance that filled the air. The dunes themselves seemed to hum in reply, the wind bending to carry the energy like a living thing. Arden could feel it in his chest, a vibration that was neither fear nor joy, but something raw and infinite. He glanced at Lyra, whose eyes glowed brighter now, pulsing in tandem with the tower. She was no longer merely the exiled daughter of a distant throne, she was the axis around which this moment spun. The Imperial commander spoke into a translator, his voice cutting through the resonance. Identify yourself, anomaly. Step forward or be neutralized. Lyra did not move. She tilted her head slightly, a small smile curving her lips, and activated the tower fully. The light exploded outward, cascading across the dunes in ribbons of color so intense that the soldiers instinctively shielded their eyes. Every pattern was precise, mathematical, yet infused with something organic, almost sacred. The sands beneath the dropship seemed to bloom, tiny crystalline formations sprouted from the dust, humming with energy, responding to the frequencies she projected. The commander faltered, the translation device crackling. What is this? Arden stepped beside her, uncertain if he was stepping into glory or doom. It's what you abandoned, he said quietly. The light continued to swell, wrapping the soldiers, the sand, and even the horizon itself in iridescent resonance. It was not merely illumination, it was comprehension. Every beam, every pulse conveyed the story of her exile, her survival, and the power of a being deemed unworthy. The soldiers felt it, not through logic, but through the senses, a deep vibration that bypassed reason and touched instinct. Ships powered down as their systems were overwhelmed, energy shields flickering in response to the frequencies. The commander's voice was small now, unsteady. Withdraw. You are beyond our protocol. Lyra lowered her hands slightly, the tower still thrumming with residual energy. She looked at Arden. Do you see? She asked. He nodded, his jaw tight. They understand now. Not by fear, not by force, but by what you are. The soldiers retreated, their formations breaking as the dunes seemed to pulse beneath their departure. The auroras above mirrored the tower's resonance, spiraling into new shapes, reflecting a galaxy that had watched silently as she reclaimed herself. For the first time in months, Lyra breathed without fear. The exile had ended not with surrender, but with a declaration. And as she stood beside Arden, bathed in the afterglow of their defiance, the moon of Varn seemed to hold its breath, listening, acknowledging, and perhaps even smiling. The dawn on Varn was sharp, the sky a brittle silver stretched over dunes that had begun to bloom in ways no one had expected. Crystalline growths now pierced the sands, reflecting the residual hum of the tower's resonance, casting fractured rainbows over the workshop and the surrounding plain. Lyra moved among them, her fingertips brushing against the translucent spires as if drawing nourishment from them, and the growths responded, pulsing faintly with her touch. She had become a living axis of energy, her presence shaping the moon itself. Arden watched her, hands coated in dust and alloy shavings. He had spent days repairing and reinforcing the tower after the Imperial fleet's retreat, ensuring the structure could withstand the next surge of energy she might summon. It was more than a tool now, it had become a conduit for something far beyond either of them, a proof that life, no matter how exiled or scorned, could bend reality to its will. The colonists began to return cautiously, their small settlements scattered across the dunes. They came first as whispers in the distance, scanning the horizon for danger. Then, emboldened by what they had seen from afar, they drew closer, marveling at the impossible structures and the way the air seemed alive around Lyra. Children dared to touch the crystalline growths, their laughter resonating in harmonic patterns with the lingering energy, as if the moon itself were teaching them the language of creation. Arden guided them in cautious repairs, but it was Lyra who taught them to see. She extended her hands over the crystal and metal, letting currents of energy ripple through the structures, showing the colonists how to sense the resonance beneath the surface of their tools and shelters. The villagers began to rebuild, not merely to survive, but to harmonize with the frequencies she shared, crafting homes and instruments that sang with light and sound. From orbit, the Empire observed, its fleets still hovering in silent judgment. The Emperor himself had activated a direct surveillance feed, his eyes narrowing at the sight of his ugly daughter orchestrating life on a barren moon. The images showed Lyra standing tall atop the dune ridge, the tower behind her radiating a spectral pulse, as metal flowers sprouted from the ground in patterns of impossible symmetry. His advisors whispered warnings, but he said nothing, staring until his reflection on the viewport glass seemed to waver. On the surface, Lyra's focus had shifted. She was no longer simply defending herself, she was transforming Varn into something extraordinary. Her hands traced arcs of energy through the towers, and the dunes themselves responded, sand crystallized, water condensed in small oases, the air thickened with the faint scent of ozone and new life. Arden marveled at the changes, the subtle bloom of flora that defied the moon's natural chemistry, all growing in harmony with her energy. She was creating a sanctuary from exile, a place that could exist independent of the Empire's judgment. The Imperial fleet, unable to penetrate her defenses, began to retreat incrementally. But the Emperor's presence remained a spectral weight, a reminder that her freedom was fragile. Yet Lyra did not waver. She had discovered a truth more potent than imperial law or royal decree, her value was defined not by those who had cast her out, but by what she could create in the void. Arden worked alongside her, building auxiliary structures to channel the tower's energy more efficiently. They experimented with harmonic conduits, embedding fragments of alien alloys and rare minerals scavenged from Varn's orbit. Each addition amplified the resonance, not destructively, but in a way that nurtured the life around them. Even the wind seemed to obey, carrying currents of energy to the far reaches of the dunes, coaxing growth from barren soil. At night, Lyra would sit atop the ridge, the tower's glow casting long shadows across the dunes. Arden joined her, often in silence, listening to the low hum that filled the air. The colonists had begun calling it the pulse, a sound that carried stories of survival, defiance, and creation. Sometimes, she would speak softly, recounting fragments of her life before exile, memories of palaces and empty mirrors, corridors lined with perfection that had never seen her for what she truly was. Arden listened, letting her words drift into the night, knowing that these recollections were as much a part of their project as the towers themselves. One evening, as the moons of Varn aligned in a rare celestial conjunction, the tower pulsed with a resonance that exceeded anything they had ever generated. The dunes shimmered with bioluminescent flora, the colonist structures vibrated in harmonic patterns, and the very air seemed to bend light in complex geometries. Lyra extended her hands, channeling energy into the tower, and the auroras above mirrored the pulses, spiraling in perfect symmetry across the sky. The Emperor, observing from orbit, finally understood, not through explanation, not through report, but by witnessing what had been wrought in the place he had deemed unworthy. His daughter had not only survived, she had transformed a dead moon into a living ecosystem, bending energy, matter, and perception to her will. For the first time, he felt something he had not in years, awe. When the Imperial envoy finally descended, it was not in force, but in silence. They approached with caution, shields lowered, not daring to provoke the light that filled the horizon. Lyra stood alone atop the ridge, unshielded, radiant, a living declaration that the Empire's rules could not contain her. Arden remained at her side, hands clasped in silent support, witnessing the culmination of months of labor, trust, and understanding. The envoy's commander bowed deeply, a gesture not of submission, but of recognition. Lyra's smile was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it held the weight of a triumph that no warship or fleet could undo. Varn had become a testament, a sanctuary, and a warning. Power alone does not define worth. Creation does. And for the first time, Lyra allowed herself to feel it, the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she was no longer a discarded shadow of the throne, but the architect of a new dawn. In that moment, as the first tendrils of true life spread across the dunes and the auroras danced above, Arden realized that the carpenter who had once repaired broken things had helped shape something far greater, not just a sanctuary, but a world remade in the image of resilience, hope, and extraordinary friendship. The moons of Varn hung low in the sky, their pale light casting silver streaks across the dunes. The wind no longer screamed with the harshness of exile. It sang in gentle harmonics, carrying faint pulses from the towers Lyra had built. The once barren moon now thrummed with life, a network of crystal spires and energy conduits stretching across the plains, their resonance touching even the smallest pockets of settlement. The colonists had embraced the transformation, learning to shape their homes and tools in harmony with the living energy that flowed from her. Lyra walked among the structures, her luminous skin casting soft light on the faces of the settlers. Children ran between crystalline arches, laughing as their movements activated subtle pulses that made the metal flowers bloom and glow. Adults tended gardens of engineered flora, each plant attuned to the frequencies Lyra maintained. Even the dunes themselves seemed alive, shifting gently beneath her feet, as though the moon recognized her as its steward. Arden moved beside her, carrying a tool case now heavy with delicate instruments he had fashioned to amplify the tower's resonance. The silence between them was comfortable, full of unspoken understanding. They had rebuilt more than a shelter or a workshop, they had rebuilt a community, a world, a place where Lyra's existence could flourish unjudged and celebrated. One morning, a distant hum grew into a deep vibration beneath the ground. The colonists paused in their work, watching as a fleet of smaller ships descended, not from the Empire, but from neighboring colonies, drawn by the reports of the luminous moon and the strange phenomena it bore. Merchants, explorers, and scholars came cautiously at first, scanning, observing, but gradually joining the rhythm Lyra had established. Trade resumed, technology was shared, and knowledge began to flow in a way Varn had never known. Lyra ascended the highest ridge, her form a beacon in the rising sun. From orbit, the Emperor watched silently. He had not intervened after the envoy's retreat. The sight before him was undeniable. His daughter, the one he had exiled for imperfection, had reshaped a world. She was not the shadow he had feared, she was its axis. For the first time, he understood something he had long refused to consider, that worth was not assigned by decree or by the symmetry of one's form, but by the capacity to create, to inspire, to change what had been dead into life. The Emperor's fleet lingered for observation, but they never landed. Orders to engage or reclaim were absent. He spoke only once, quietly, into the translator feed that linked the orbiting command ship to the surface. "I see what I did not understand. You are extraordinary." There was no apology, no request for return, only acknowledgement. Lyra tilted her head, sensing the faint projection of his voice through the void, and for the first time allowed a trace of forgiveness, not for him, but for the chapter he had written in her life. Arden joined her on the ridge. "You've changed more than this moon," he said. "You've changed them, even him." She smiled faintly. "Not just him. Anyone who sees this, anyone who survives this light, they cannot remain the same." She stretched her hands, letting faint pulses radiate outward. The desert blooms responded in synchronized motion, their glow spreading over the horizon like waves of living color. In the weeks that followed, Varn became a hub for outcasts and wanderers. Refugees from distant systems came, drawn by tales of the luminous woman and the carpenter who had recognized her. Scientists studied the energy flows, colonists learned to cultivate the crystal flora, and children grew up knowing that even those who had been rejected could become architects of miracles. Lyra taught them to sense resonance, to bend light and sound to their will, and Arden guided their hands with the wisdom of someone who had spent a lifetime restoring broken things. Together, they created a civilization in microcosm, a blend of human ingenuity and alien brilliance. One night, beneath the twin moons, Lyra and Arden stood at the edge of the highest crystal spire. The stars reflected in her golden eyes, mirroring the constellations of her birthplace, the home she had lost but would never forget. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what would have happened if I had stayed?" Arden placed a hand on hers. "You wouldn't be here. And this world wouldn't be what it is. Some things have to fall apart before they can be remade." She nodded, letting the warmth of the thought settle. The past was a shadow, but the future glimmered brightly across the dunes, alive with pulse and light. Below them, the colonists' settlement thrummed in harmony with the towers, a symphony of life that had risen from exile. Far above, in orbit, the Emperor watched the moon shimmer with the light of creation. There were no commands issued, no fleets dispatched, no declarations of reclaiming his lost daughter. He understood that the distance between them was not merely spatial, it was principle, recognition, and growth. He had lost her to the void, but she had filled it with brilliance that could not be erased. As Varn's horizon blushed under the rising suns, Lyra allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. Her exile was over, not because she had returned to a throne, but because she had claimed something far greater: autonomy, respect, and the freedom to create. Arden stood beside her, silent but present, their partnership unspoken yet complete. The light of the towers pulsed once more, as if acknowledging the moon's transformation. It spread over dunes, crystalline blooms, and settlements alike, touching every life that had dared to grow in the shadow of neglect. And for the first time since her birth, Lyra did not feel like an anomaly, a mistake, or a blemish. She was the axis of a world, the spark of life and resonance that even the Empire could not contain. The wind carried the soft hum of the towers across the dunes, a song that was both ending and beginning. And in its harmony, every exile, every loss, and every act of creation converged into a single truth: beauty, worth, and power were not given, they were built, nurtured, and lived. Varn had become a sanctuary. Lyra had become more than a princess, more than a survivor. She had become a force, luminous and eternal, a testament that even the most discarded could shape the cosmos itself.